All right, so Chris, I'm going to start with you. So if you would just tell us about your film. Welcome to RoxFilm. We're so glad to have you here. And what I wanted to let you all know too is that you are screening as part of RoxFilm at Home. And the funny thing this year is that we have sold more online tickets to the online program that we curated than the in-person program right now. And I think that has a lot to do with COVID. I think that people are also like the idea of screening in watching in their homes and maybe with other people. And so we specifically did this to give people the opportunity to do that, to curate a really special program for the online folks. So just so you know that, I think that's exciting. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about your film?
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you for having the film When I Get Grown as part of the Roxbury International Film Festival. The film is about a topic that some have heard about, the freedom riders, but what's unique about When I Get Grown is that it's told in the voice of Dr. Bernard Lafayette, a famous civil rights, really an icon, but he tells some of the detail that usually is not included in stories and anecdotes about the freedom riders. And a lot of folks don't know that President Kennedy actually got involved because the church that Bernard Lafayette was in, when the mob surrounded it, it was the intention of the mob to burn the church to the ground. There were 1,500 people in the church, including Dr. King, Fred Shuttlesworth, other civil rights icons like Diane Nash. But because they were throwing Molotov cocktails at the windows, at least one of them made it inside the church and was extinguished. But King was on the phone with Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, who eventually got his brother, the President of the United States. They put the Pentagon on high alert. A lot of folks don't realize that
Yeah.
something this dramatic happened, that they were intending to burn down a church with 1,500 people in it. That's just one example from the film that Bernard Lafayette talks about, and it just speaks of the extraordinary price that was paid for some of the things we take for granted today.
Great. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about parallels to today as well. Parisa, welcome from Scotland. Can you tell us a little bit about your film? I was fascinated by it. And like Chris's film, you feel like as a person of color in this country or anywhere that I know all that stuff. I know about all the things that happened in the civil rights movement. And you realize the things we know are the things we were taught, right? There's so much more that we weren't that was never talked about in school and in our history books and everything. Why it's so important to have filmmakers like yourselves bring these stories to life. So tell us a little bit about Frederick Douglass in Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you completely. Thanks, first of all, for choosing this film for your festival. Really appreciate it, along with the other films from these amazing filmmakers. So thanks for that. Um, yeah, I mean, Frederick Douglass in Scotland, when I speak to my friends here in Scotland, they have no idea who Frederick Douglass is. But when I speak to my cousins in the US, they're like, are you doing a film about Frederick Douglass? And they know all about Frederick Douglass. So that is the difference. So basically, people in Scotland have no idea about him, but also, like you say, people in the US have no idea about Frederick Douglass's impact in Scotland, and he had a massive impact here. He was known, he became a national hero, and this was in the mid 1800s, but then he also came back a second time, as you can see in the film, later on in the 1800s. But literally, he was in a sense invisibilized from the history books. And no one really knew him, when I grew up and all the generations before. But this is also similar to the fact that Scotland's heavy involvement in slavery and the slave trade was also very much hidden and pushed under the carpet. So it's all starting to come out now. And that is why, as well, doing a film like this and showing how courageous Frederick Douglass was, as well as other freedom fighters who came from the US, how courageous they were, and because people are starting to want to learn this history.
It's so interesting because I don't know if you know, there's a feature, someone did a feature doc about this same thing this year. And both were submitted to our festival, and we were like, oh my gosh, like this is like so amazing. And just, you know, all sorts of reasons about not being able to fit stuff in, but we were so excited that we were able to at least bring the short in. But it would be really great to have both of you. So yeah, this is exactly it. Like we hardly know about US history, never mind like freedom fighters like Frederick Douglass, who was over in Scotland. So like what was it that made you, both of you, and Chris, I'll go back to you. What was it that made you say, you know what, I need to tell this story, and I need to tell this story using film as a medium to do that?
Well, there were two reasons why we felt this particular story about the Freedom Riders was so important. One is that I'm not aware of, I mean, in decades of studying the civil rights movement, I'm not aware of many documentaries that are told exclusively in the voice of the protagonist. In this case, Bernard Lafayette. Usually the filmmaker's going to just simply show you what they want to show you, and weave together some kind of narrative. This is the story from beginning to end, starting when he's 7 years old. And that brings me to the second reason why we thought this was important. He describes in the very beginning a heartbreaking anecdote of something that happened to his grandmother in trying to board a bus in the segregated South. And it was something that he describes as, observing it, something that he couldn't help his grandmother because he was 7 years old, but he said he felt like a sword had cut him in half. And he determined in that moment that when I get grown, I'm going to do something about this. And the rest of the documentary is precisely what he did to do something about it. So the answer to your question is simply that it's a unique film in being told exclusively from him, but it's also, I think, something that really grabs the viewer, because who can't relate to the pain, or at least feel compassion for the pain of a 7-year-old?
Yeah. And I think it, you know, it resonates for all sorts of reasons. And one of those reasons mainly is that people are hungry for history that they don't necessarily know. And I think that it's really important that to know that there were many freedom fighters. There were many people, you know, doing this work, and only so many of them get pushed to the forefront. And I think that, you know, you could make dozens of stories about the people that were involved, right, in the freedom rides, and still not bring all of these names that were incredible to the light. So, you know, I think that being able to, for you to be able to dive into that and bring this, you know, voice that was voiceless for so long was really important. Parisa, what about you? So you said this is all just coming to light. We know in the US, history gets swept under the rug all the time. And now in current 2022, they're not allowing certain books to be in libraries. So they want to sweep that under the rug even more so. Why did you feel like it was important to make this film and make it now? And why was Scotland so adamant about sweeping it under the rug?
Well, to answer your first question first, why was it important? And now was there was a bit of synchronicity. So I went to a talk by Professor Celeste Burney, and she is an absolute specialist in Frederick Douglass in the US and also in Scotland. And she is at the University of Edinburgh, and she was doing a talk, but it was also interlinked with a plaque she organised to put up on the street, which is the street that I'm showing behind me, where Frederick Douglass lived for 6 months. And then along with that were these amazing civil rights activists and academics who had traveled all the way from the US to witness this plaque unveiling. And they were also going to do talks all about Douglas's impact in the US. So I just realized, and it was very, very spontaneous, but I was at the talk and I realized how historic and important this event was. So I went up to the professor at the end of the talk and I said, listen, are you interested in me filming the plaque unveiling and creating a small film? And she was really enthusiastic. And then the next day we're in touch and she was like, I'm going to apply for funding. She managed to get it. And I was like, right, within days I'd sorted out the camera person, everything. We're out there filming all of it. And then when my editor and I got together to start creating the film, we realized there was just all this other information about Douglas. So we extended the film to 15 minutes. We could have done much longer.
Yeah.
Originally, we were going to do 5 minutes. So we packed it in the 15 minutes, but captured the emotion and the importance. So that's how it came about. And what was your second question again?
It was just really about, and this is for both of you, I mean, we live in this time now and then, and there was only probably one time in history where everyone was like, well, let's give out all this information about all these historical things that happened and let's embrace it. But we're going back to covering all that up. I mean, I know for the US, it's shame. It's like, it didn't happen. As long as you can say it didn't exist, then it didn't happen. I'm just curious about Scotland, because I think our audience too would love to, we learn about it in the film. And you're right, it could have been a feature. It could be a mini series just about these folks that came to Scotland. And I think that's really interesting about learning about Frederick Douglass's journey there.
Yeah. So to give you a sense of this, I mean, like, I would say in the past 10 to 12 years, there's been a kind of started to become an acknowledgement of Scotland's links to slavery and the slave trade. Before that, it was very much just, academics who knew about it, and also, for example, the descendants of those families who were involved in the slave trade and owning plantations and so forth. But basically, how Scotland dealt with it was to just, in a sense, use very different words. So instead of like, you would read websites of estates, or and it would say, oh, the family were tobacco merchants, or they were entrepreneurs, or they were just very words like this, rather than the truth of the fact that, let's say, they own plantations in the West Indies or the southern US states or northern Guyana, or that they owned forts on the West Coast. Like there was a Scotsman who owned Banks Island on the West coast of Africa, and earn a lot of money and so forth. But information that was not freely available on the websites or taught to us. So I grew up in Glasgow, and I was taught that these tobacco merchants and entrepreneurs were, amazingly good at business, and we were taught to admire them. We had absolutely no idea that slavery and slave trade was behind that. And I would say, yeah, I mean, I'm in my 40s, and I would say that I would say it's probably the same situation up until about 10 years ago.
Wow.
And only now are schools actually starting to reassess the curricula, and decide, okay, we're going to start teaching this, but it's still, I have to say, optional for teachers to teach it. So, and I would just say that the reason that that's happened, I think that's quite a complicated question.
Yes, well, it's complicated in the US too. So
there is a level of shame,
mm-hmm.
and I think there's a lot of people, though, who are learning about now are angry that they did not know this, and they're quite
Yeah.
embarrassed they did not know this. I mean, they're embarrassed for all the, you know, connections they have in the US and so on, and their links to, you know, people of who are African American or from the West Indies and so on, and they had no idea about this history.
Wow. I
So
mean,
it's
that's just incredible. And I think for both of you, and Chris, jump in too. I mean, I think for both of you, these films are teaching films, right? Are, especially when they're shorts and they can be used in the classroom when people are allowing them to be in the classroom. But I think it's the same thing here, right? I mean, it's like we, unearthing this history and people saying, and like me saying, I didn't even know that. Like, I feel ashamed that I didn't know that. You know what I mean? And so Chris, right? Like, what's your reaction to that too? And making a film like the way you did?
Well, first, I come to the table with a tremendous and deep respect for Frederick Douglass. Let me say that about this other film. Frederick Douglass, I think, is someone that, even though maybe the United States talks more about Mr. Douglas, I feel like there are centuries to go of really appreciating the incredible contribution of this man. So I'm looking forward very enthusiastically to watching your film. But when you talk, Lisa, about just the educational nature of these films, one of the things that the civil rights movement teaches us, and this film certainly does that, it puts a spotlight on the average person, and not just the average middle-aged person, but young people. That young people have an incredible role to play in shaping the future. And it sounds a little corny, it sounds kind of trite, except for the fact that the vast majority of those who participated not only in the movement but changed history as we know it today were very young people. We
Yes.
know in Birmingham, for example, it was elementary school aged children that made a difference for Dr. King. Dr. King would not have had. Historians
Right.
like Dr. Claiborne Carson say Dr. King would not have a national holiday. There wouldn't have been a March on Washington if it were not for children, young children that put their lives on the line. And you see in this documentary, When I Get Grown, the same thing. It was really, yes, there were some older folk, and some of them that almost lost their lives, but it was primarily young people that believed in a world where people could be treated with dignity, that they were willing to make such sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about it, because I think that when we're learning about history and we're hearing about history, we always think of this is the older people that were part of this movement, and the freedom riders were students, and I think that that's why this is so important, to make sure that these films get seen by that younger generation, because I'm telling you, this next generation, they're lit, they're ready. They take no holds barred, and they want to hear about this information. They want to know who the heroes that they should be looking up to.
Well, and if I may add, if I can just dovetail what you just said there, the protests that followed the murder of George Floyd hopefully give us a preview of what's to come, with people of all colors saying enough is enough. We want something better than
Yeah.
we've been left by our parents, our grandparents, etc. And we really did see some. And in fact, if you listen to the veterans of the movement, James Lawson, for example, Bernard Lafayette, whom we've been talking about, Clarence Jones, Diane Nash, and others, Andrew Young, they will say that it is just conspicuous how many young people seem to care, how many young people are getting involved, and the fact that, as opposed to, for example, the Montgomery bus boycott, where it was almost exclusively people of color that were refusing to ride the buses. In fact, I don't know if you know, in the Montgomery bus boycott, there was only one white minister
Right,
that
yeah.
joined, which is just appallingly shameful. But it's a different story today. And I think the protests, the George Floyd protests, tell us that we may be looking at something exciting to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. But what I also think too is that for the civil rights movement, I mean, the civil rights movement, those folks, knew that they were moving on the backs of someone like a Frederick Douglass, right? They had that history. I don't know that they had the history in Scotland, but my guess is that they probably did. Um, and then it's sort of like, all of that history gets washed away. So I do think that yes, this next generation is coming up, but I also think that they're interested in this history. They're interested in what they were never told. And so that's what excites me about both of your films, is that I really want this generation now, the generation of 2022, or whatever that generation's called now, because I do think that they're moved by things that they were never told. So that's what's exciting about me. Now, Parisa, what about Scotland? I mean, you said it's not really in all the schools and they're not doing that, but how is it being received? Is there a museum? Is there a Frederick Douglass Day? Is there a way to bring this forward now that you said in the last 12 years, people are now just starting to learn about this?
Yeah, well, there's been quite a change. I mean, I would say, just linking up with what you mentioned about the George Floyd murder and the protests that followed that. I mean, there was a massive response here in Scotland, and actually, I also did produce and direct a documentary called Scotland, Slavery and Statues. And that captured, it's captured what's been going on in Scotland over 4 years. And it's been led by a gentleman here called Sir Jeff Palmer, and he's actually in the Douglas film as well. He's the one that mentions about the legacy of slavery, which is the fractured lives that many people have. So, and I would say, I would say he's like the modern Frederick Douglass in Scotland. Once that film came out, and even before that, he's become a bit of a hero, and he's quite a role model for the younger Scots here who are trying to push for change. And like you've mentioned as well, this time at the events and the protests that were happening in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and so on, it's a real mix. A lot of young people, and a real mix of heritages, from not just Black Scottish people, which there are, because a lot of people think, are there many Black people? But there are.
I was going to ask that question, but I didn't know how.
Yeah, no, there are, absolutely. And a lot of, mixed heritage. I mean, I'm Scottish and Iranian, and okay, it was perhaps a bit unusual at the time when I was growing up, but actually, that's become, much more common. There's a lot of I guess you call it here mixed marriages in a sense, and a real mix of heritages. So anyway, it was great seeing all these people come out for these events, and that has really pushed on the pressure, I would say, but also the realization of the museums, of the schools and so forth, that they've really got to acknowledge this history and be upfront about it. And then it's not like Sir Jeff says in my film, it's not about recrimination. It's really just about acknowledging this history. Yeah. And so basically what's happening now is the museums are relabeling a lot of their exhibits to explain that, the wealth that came, or let's say this portrait or whatever came from a plantation holder's house and things like this.
Wow.
And and then also there has been a push for a number of years by key groups in Scotland for a specific museum to really, concentrate on colonialism and slavery and the slave trade. So that's really making progress. And I think that's going to happen in the next, I would say, next 5 years. Also, yeah, the schools are taking notes. And also as well, what's interesting is there's quite a lot of schools and boarding schools. They're all started by very wealthy plantation owners. Wow. Came back. Basically, they went out to the West Indies, Northern Guyana, and so on to make their wealth. And then they would come back and become landed gentry because they could afford the land. And then they had the political rights to vote in Parliament. But then also they donated money to build schools. And so these schools are starting to be the fact that the money has come from exactly the slave trade and slavery, and basically from African people who worked so hard and gave up their lives for all these schools to be built, So anyway, so basically it's all coming out.
And that's great. And you're documenting it. And you know what? It's the same thing that's happening here, right? Schools are realizing, like Harvard and everyone is like realizing, oh my gosh, like we were part of the slave trade. How are we now going to acknowledge that to our students, to our faculty, the world, that this money, that this university, that these schools were built from the slave trade, and that acknowledgement, you're right, is coming out. It's just really interesting at a time when when Congress here in the U.S. and legislation is trying to stop all of that information coming out because no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to be blamed for it. But you're right, it's not a blame. It's just an acknowledgement, right? And you folks have created these great films to help us understand that history. And this is what we love to do at RoxFilm, like I said before, is unearth the things that people know so like little about, or even if they know something about it, it's bringing them even more information. I think the more information we have about our history, the more we can move forward. We can move forward with acknowledgements, we can move forward with reparations, we can move forward with so many things, just understanding this rich history. So I want to thank you both for jumping on a quick Zoom call to talk about your films. I can't thank you enough for sharing them with us. I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing to bring these stories forward. And I wish you the best of luck going forward. And if there's ever anything that we can do at RoxFilm to help move your films, we are more than happy to do that.
Thank you so much.
Can I just say this?
Yes.
Behind me, this is a mural by a local Edinburgh artist who painted Frederick Douglass on the side of a wall on the street he lived in. So I just want to recognize the artist. He's called, his Twitter name is @Trench1.
@Trent1.
And it was excellent. So things like that started occurring in Scotland after that went up. So it's fabulous.
Well, I have to tell you, Scotland now is on my list of places to come and do the tour, and I'm going to look you up when I get there. So I can't wait.
Come visit, absolutely. That'd be great.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's very exciting. Chris, any last words for you?
Just gratitude for what you're doing in showcasing these films, and thank you especially for selecting When I Get Grown. Much obliged.
Sure thing. All right, take care, both of you, and we'll see you around somewhere. Good luck on your festival journey.
Thank you. Take care, you both.
Take care.
Bye-bye.